boy different. He's nice. He's a talent. He's a joy to be around off the court. And his English is getting a lot better. He's starting to understand everybody a little bit more and more day by day. So I'm enjoying being his teammate, and he has so much growth in him. And just to see how talented he is, the moves that he was doing out there, he looked more comfortable than he did the first game. And so you can tell that he, like I said, he's getting more comfortable, and the sky's the limit for him.
Hey Rip City, this is Deni Avdija, and you're listening to The Briefcase with Casey Holdahl.
Greetings, Trailblazer fans, and welcome to The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. Episode 173 of The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. I'm your host, Casey Holdahl, and the Portland Trailblazers are now 1-1 for the preseason after holding on versus the Kings Friday night at Moda Center, something they weren't necessarily able to do versus the Warriors in their first preseason game. We'll talk about that game. We'll talk about Yang Hansen's third quarter. Absolutely fantastic third quarter from Yang Hansen, bouncing back from a lackluster debut in preseason, coming back and having a fantastic game, a fantastic 6 minutes. We'll talk about Hansen's performance versus the Kings, and we'll talk about Chauncey, who continues to tinker with lineups throughout the preseason with 2 games left to go on this edition of The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. Well, after getting outlegged in the fourth quarter by the Warriors Wednesday night in San Francisco to take the loss in their first preseason game, Trailblazers bounced back on Friday to get a 124-123 victory versus the Kings at Moda Center Friday night. Blazers played well in the first quarter, as they did. Actually, a lot of it was very similar to the game versus the Warriors. For the 3 quarters, seemed like the Blazers were probably the better team. Fourth quarter, both teams turned over to the ends of their benches, and that goes the way that it typically goes. But this time, the Trailblazers were able to get the victory. So it started out first quarter, Jrue Holiday, 10 points, 4-6 shooting from the field, 2-3 shooting from 3, 2 rebounds and an assist in just 8 minutes for Jrue Holiday in the first quarter. I feel like Jrue's looked fantastic. I wouldn't be surprised if they maybe just sat Jrue for the rest of the preseason. If Scoot Henderson was available, I imagine they probably would do that, because I think 2 preseason games, you've already really got a sense of what Jrue Holiday can do. I don't know that he necessarily needs the reps at this point. Granted, it is with a new team. So if there was Scoot on this team ready to go and healthy, I think maybe they might sit Jrue down until the start of the regular season. But since he's not, he'll probably still continue to play sparingly. He did play in the second half of the game versus the Kings, didn't play in the second half of the game versus the Warriors. That was planned. Chauncey Billups had even said before he's going to play him for the first 2 quarters, not play him in the second half. That was not the case versus the Kings. So maybe they'll continue to play Jrue, but it seems to me at least that, like, Jrue, a guy with so many years in the league, doesn't hurt to have him out there. Obviously, injury concerns being what they are, but it also doesn't really look like he needs the reps. Like, Jrue knows what he's doing out there. So, and he did that in the first quarter versus the Kings. Offense still working really well too. The kind of reshaped offense Trailblazers have been running so far in preseason, they've been putting up points, have been scoring, I would say, easier than they've generally been scoring in the regular season last year. Now, granted, it's preseason, so some of that is, you don't really want to make too much of it, but it does seem like things are flowing particularly well. They shot 50% from the field in the first quarter in that game versus the Kings. Kings ended up bouncing back, or at least answering back in the second quarter. They shoot 55% in the second quarter and 33% from 3 to outscore the Blazers by 12 in the second quarter, take a 64-58 lead into the half. Blazers do the same thing in the third quarter, though, come back, play some really nice basketball in the third quarter behind Yang Hansen, who we'll talk about here in a minute. But Yang obviously played a huge role in that. But Shaedon Sharpe also very good in the third quarter after kind of floating around in the first half, something we didn't necessarily see versus the Warriors, but just a little less engaged than maybe you would want to see Shaedon, or at least that you would hope you would see Shaedon in that first half. Came out in the third quarter, really played well. Both him and Hansen together, I think, make for an interesting duo out there. They did play some minutes together, which I thought was great. They looked fantastic in those minutes. 9 points on 4 or 5 shooting and 2 rebounds in the third quarter for Shaedon Sharpe. Dario Saric going 3-3 from 3, 2-2 from the line for 11 points. Really kind of kept the Kings in it in the third quarter, as Portland was really pushing, again, behind the play of Shaedon and Hansen. If not for Dario Saric, that game is probably over in the third quarter, but he did come out, kept them in it. Trailblazers take a 95-91 lead into the third quarter. Blazers end up going up by 13 in the fourth quarter, and then they lead by 13 in the fourth quarter. And then at that point in time, they put in the ends of the bench, the two-way guys, And again, that kind of goes the way that it went in versus the Warriors. Not exactly the same way as it went versus the Warriors. They didn't give up 51 points in the fourth quarter like they did versus the Warriors. But the Blazers get up. I think they were up 13 with like 9 minutes to play. Kings start pushing, get the game close. End up tying the game at 123 with I think 10.8 seconds to play, as I see in my notes here. Caleb Love doing a really nice job in the fourth quarter, getting to the line, generating some offense that way. Hit some free throws in kind of the 2 minute with about 2 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. Then started to miss some free throws at the end of the fourth quarter. Had a trip where he goes 0 of 2. Kings able to tie the game at that point, 123. Gets another trip to the line, misses the first. At that point in time, you're thinking maybe we're in line for a overtime preseason game, which no one ever wants to play overtime in preseason. But in the game versus the Kings, it would have been especially odious considering that it was such a long game anyways. I think there was like over 70 fouls called in that game. The first quarter of that game, I think, took 45 minutes because there were a ton of fouls called in the first quarter as well. So if that had gone to overtime, I don't know if a whole lot of people would have forgiven Caleb for that. I know everyone on press row would have been pretty upset about that. But Caleb does end up getting the second free throw to give the Trailblazers the 124-123 victory. Kings did have a chance with, I think, 0.6 seconds to play to win the game or at least tie the game. I think Ron Rupert got a steal, keeping them from even getting a chance at a game-winning / game-tying free throw. So the Trailblazers end up getting their first win of the 2025 preseason. Congratulations to them. They were the better team again throughout the first three quarters, I would say. Second quarter, actually, Kings did look a bit better. Portland's offense kind of failed them a little bit in the second quarter. But otherwise, I thought just a really nice performance from the Trailblazers. The defense is there. The offense is improving. And I think you're kind of starting to see kind of the way this team is going to play this season. I think Drew's been great. Deni's been great. Tumani didn't play in the second half of that game, played in the first half, sat in the second half. Chauncey said it was knee soreness. I'm guessing at this point too, particularly for guys like Tumani, Deni, Shaden, Drew, or Jerami, the guys who are kind of all rotating around those wing positions. Chauncey wants to see a bunch of guys kind of in different slots, bunch of different lineups. So if there's a guy who's even like kind of sort of feeling anything, I'm guessing they're probably just going to sit him in preseason because they feel like, hey, that gives us a reason to look at some of these other lineups anyways. So that's kind of what I chalk up Tumani not playing in the second half to. Jerami did get the start in the second half in place of Tumani. So something a little noteworthy there. I mean, I guess that's probably what you would expect there, but still with all the conversation about who's going to start between Shaden and Deni and Tumani and Jerami, I think it's always noteworthy to point that out. So the Trailblazers, once again, getting their first victory of the preseason. They earned that one. Now halfway through their preseason schedule. Real quick, let's run down some of the numbers. 18 points on 6 of 13 shooting from the field, though he did go 0-5 from 3 for Jerami Grant. Also got 4 rebounds in 18 minutes. As I mentioned, Jerami came off the bench in that game after starting versus the Warriors and did start in the second half with Tumani having some knee pain. No reason to chance that there, and they want to see Jerami in those lineups anyways, so makes some sense there. Deni Avdija, 15 points, 4-9 shooting from the field, 1-3 shooting from 3, 6-6 from the line, 6 rebounds, 2 assists in 23 minutes. As I mentioned, Deni did get the start in that game after coming off the bench versus the Warriors. Drew Holiday, 12 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, 1 steal in 22 minutes. Again, Drew looks like he is ready for the regular season. 13 points for Blake Wesley, including a fantastic dunk. Blake Wesley has really been a nice addition to this team. Going to see some minutes, particularly with Scoot out, at least for I don't even know how long at this point. Not expecting we're going to get any kind of update on Scoot until around that initial 4-week mark. And then maybe not even then if he's not cleared to go back to basketball activities. So while Scoot is out, Blake Wesley is going to be a guy who's going to see considerable minutes, and he has looked really good in those minutes. 13 points for Blake Wesley. And then 12 points for Caleb Love, another guy who is likely to probably see some extended minutes until Scoot Henderson is able to return to the lineup. So just a really nice game for the Trailblazers. Just a really good team effort. Again, I think you're kind of seeing what you want to see. You want to see how Drew's looked in preseason. I feel like he's looked great. You want to see how that wing rotation is coming along. You want to see what Shaden is doing. I think you saw quite a bit of that. And I think you want to see what Donovan Clingan is doing defensively. I feel like he's been great throughout preseason so far, just playing kind of, I wouldn't say limited minutes, but not extended minutes at least. And I feel like he's looked really good in the minutes that he's played. And then you kind of want to see what you got out of Yang Hansen, who was the absolute story of that game versus the Kings after, a bit of a slow start versus the Kings in the first half of that game. And, a what I would say would be kind of a lackluster preseason debut versus the Warriors. Again, the game versus the Warriors, like you could tell he was nervous. Guys are going to, at some point in time, 20-year-old rookies are going to show their age. And I feel like Hansen did in that game versus the Warriors, but he had a fantastic bounce back versus the Kings. Found his groove in the third quarter of that game, made back-to-back three-pointers, both off assists from Deni Avdija, which seemed to cure kind of the nervousness that he seemed to have out there. It seems like every time something went right for Hansen, like you could just see like the confidence growing. And I would say, in that Warriors game, not a whole lot went right for Hansen. He scored 4 points. Like even the few things that he was able to get to go down didn't look very good. I don't think they were especially within rhythm. And so just not a whole lot of stuff in that game versus the Warriors for Hansen to feel good about, which, when you're trying to kind of make your way in the league as a young guy who's learning the language, like it helps to just have, some positive things to point to, be like, okay, I did that. I showed myself that I could do that. And so when he hit those 2 3-pointers, you could kind of see like, all right, Hansen, he's kind of settling in now a little bit. And that was just the start of it, throughout the next 4 minutes, finished 2 tough layups through traffic, like taking contact and then finishing layups, back to the basket, spin move layups. So he had a mid-range jumper as well around the 3-point line, found Shaedon Sharpe for just a great bounce pass dime for a Shaedon dunk, which the more and more guys play with Hansen, I think the more they're going to realize that, hey, like if I backdoor, if I just make hard cuts, he's going to find me in places. And he was absolutely able to do that with Shaedon to get him a great dunk in that game as well. And blocked a Malik Monk shot as time was expiring, made 2 free throws as well, the last of which gave the Trailblazers a 64-58 lead going into the fourth quarter. Fans going nuts, and Hansen just looking real comfortable. It looked like the Hansen that we saw at Summer League, directing traffic, making plays, playing loose, having fun out there. And I again, every single time that like he did something and the crowd went wild, like you just see like his confidence and his belief in himself kind of grow. And I wouldn't even say confidence necessarily, but just he looked just so much more comfortable every time something kind of worked for him. And again, when things don't work, I imagine there's probably parts of Hansen too, just knowing him just a little bit, where when something doesn't work, or if he has a rough game, particularly in, first game versus the Warriors, it's your first real NBA action, it doesn't really go especially well. And you're maybe thinking to yourself like, boy, am I ready for this? Like, did I get myself into something here that maybe I'm not prepared for having success in? And then he goes out versus the Kings in that third quarter and looked exactly like the player that the Trailblazers drafted with the 16th overall pick, exactly the player that gave Portland so much confidence in kind of going off the board and getting Hansen when no one else really had him rated, or at least publicly, in the first round. And again, it just goes back to what I've said over and over and over again about Hansen, is that every time there's been a chance for him to kind of come out and not meet expectations, he has done that. And he didn't do that versus the Warriors. So that was the first time in practices or workouts or at the combine or in the U19s or in the CBA or in Summer League where he didn't come out and really look like a player who were like, boy, no wonder they took this guy in the first round. He looks great. Didn't necessarily look that way versus the Warriors. That's the first time that's happened, at least in the short amount of time that Hansen's been with the Trailblazers. But then it did happen versus the Kings. When it was all said and done, 14 points on 5 of 5 shooting from the field, 2 of 2 shooting from 3, 2 of 2 shooting from the line, 2 rebounds and an assist and a block in 6 minutes in the third quarter for Hansen. Again, that's in 6 minutes. That's a good stat line for a game for a rookie, let alone putting that up in a 6-minute stretch. Granted, it's preseason, it's the Kings. Kings are not the Warriors. There were times when Hansen did struggle a little bit. Domantas Sabonis is a tough cover for a guy like Hansen. I mean, a tough cover for a guy like Donovan Clingan as well. And I would say that, he struggled a little bit in kind of covering Domantas in that game, as you would expect he would. I mean, Sabonis is an all-star. And again, just a really tough guard for a guy like Hansen, more of a stretch 4-5, where Hansen is a straight up 5. So, you kind of expect that. And again, Domantas Sabonis is an all-star playing against a 20-year-old rookie. You'd expect that he's going to make him look like a 20-year-old rookie at times. But I think the fact that Hansen didn't let that get him down, didn't let that affect his game, and when he was able to get back into the game in the third quarter, really took advantage. I think that's a great sign too. That shows that he's not necessarily a guy who, if things don't go his way, that he's going to kind of shrink down and not kind of take on the challenge the next time it comes. He was prepared and ready to go in that third quarter. When the ball came to him, he was confident. He shot it, got it to go, came to him again. Figured, hey, might as well get another one. Got it to go. And at that point in time, you can tell he starts to feel it a little bit. When you hit those shots, it forces the defense to come out and defend you at the 3-point line, opening up Hansen's ability to drive to the rim. The one play, I think, where, he pump fakes, put the ball on the floor. Drew Eubanks comes to guard. He kind of puts his back into him, spins off of him, and finishes around the rim. Again, those are the kind of plays where you see him execute those in an NBA game, even in a preseason game. You say to yourself, okay, I get it. I understand why they decided to again, not necessarily take a chance, but to just trust their own scouting and their own reports and their own gut about what they saw out of Hansen. And again, you saw it in the third quarter, in a 6-minute stretch in the third quarter versus the Kings. And again, part of that is just getting comfortable. I think part of it is also the rest of the team getting comfortable with who Hansen is. Like there was one time in that third quarter where he had the ball up, and I think it was actually maybe when he shot the mid-range free throw line jumper, was he kind of had the ball up and he was looking for guys to pass it to. He was kind of doing that water polo thing where you're just holding the ball up high and you're just looking around for someone to come open. No one did, and so Hansen was like, all right, and took the jumper. I think his preference would have been for someone to cut. And, other teams know kind of what Hansen is going to try to do after seeing Summer League. So in their scouting report, they're like, hey, when this guy gets the ball, make sure you're on your P's and Q's in terms of your own man, because they're going to try to backdoor. He's going to try to find guys. And so, once I wouldn't say scouted necessarily, but that's something that I guarantee is on the scouting report when you look at it. Hansen's playing right now, so there's going to be some mention of the way that he's playing, and they're going to say, hey, if he's got the ball, and if you can tell he's looking to create, which he's very often doing, just try not to get backdoored. They were still able to get Shaden for that dunk anyways, but, teams are going to counter, and it's going to be on the Blazers to counter it from that as well. And that kind of goes to what I was talking about in terms of the Warriors game, just being a little disappointed that they didn't really kind of give the ball to Hansen and then let him kind of do what he does best. You understand that because they're still going to play within the general dictates of the offense they're running. But I do think that when you see what Hansen's able to do, you probably maybe put in a package or two, or at least when he's out there, say, hey, Hansen, if the ball swings to you and if you want to get out there and kind of make some decisions, you're more than welcome to do that. I think that's probably what it's going to be the rookie season for Hansen. I think that's probably how they're going to approach the way that he plays. And then maybe as they get more and more comfortable with him, and if he has success, then maybe they put in a few more packages here and there. If not, I think they just kind of let it ride. But I think what you saw in that game versus the Kings is a good reason why you maybe just want to play a little bit differently sometimes when Hansen's in the game. I'm not saying every time. I'm not even saying the majority of the time, but I think part of the time, if you really want to get the best out of what Hansen does, you probably need to maybe kind of change a little bit. Now, granted, they want to play more in motion. They want to play with more ball movement. They want to play with more cuts and passing and more reads. And I think Hansen is the guy that absolutely allows you to do that because he's smart. He has a really good understanding of the confines of a basketball court and kind of how it works, and when one guy moves, kind of how that changes where the other guys are out on the court and the spacing. It just seems like he has a real good sense of those things as a 20-year-old. So, I think what you saw out of Hansen, again, it was in 6 minutes and it was just one game versus the Kings, and let's be frank too, Hansen's got 6 inches and probably at least 50 pounds on Drew Eubanks, my guy Drew. So, that's part of it as well. But you play who's in front of you, like you can only play who's on your schedule, and you can only be defended by the guys who are on the court opposite you. So it's not like that's on Hansen or anything. But when you consider the way he played and how he looked, I think a lot of enthusiasm, and rightfully so. I just do think it's always important to remember that he is a 20-year-old rookie. That was a preseason game versus the Kings. So, you want to try to keep your expectations in line, and you don't want to put too much on him. But again, a lot of reason to feel really good about what you saw out of Hansen in that game versus the Kings. And once again, if that had just been the first time that he ever went out and looked really good in that setting, you'd probably say to yourself, like, well, okay, something to build on there, but we'll see how it goes. But the fact that he's done that in almost every single instance in which he's played with the Trailblazers at this point, other than that Warriors game, I think, again, gives you an indication that that's more of who he is at this point in time than the way he played versus the Warriors. And, the Warriors are a really good team. They're better than the Kings. They're going to be harder to play against than the Kings. So there's obviously that part. And you're going to get the Warriors again because you're going to play them again on Tuesday at Moda Center. So you maybe get a chance to kind of see some growth there, or see if it was Hansen being nervous in that first game versus the Warriors, or if it was just what the Warriors did. It's something in between. Either way, a lot of reason to be really excited about what we saw out of Hansen in that game. Obviously, the fans just loved it. And, that's a part of it too, is I think Hansen plays a exciting brand of basketball that people enjoy watching. But the other thing, and I've been saying this for 20 plus years now, Trailblazers fans love rookies. And maybe every team's fans love rookies. Blazers fans love their rookies more than other teams. I firmly believe that. Go back and look. I've been saying it my entire career. We just like young, up-and-coming players in Portland. The idea of what could be, the idea of there being kind of something on the horizon. I think that just speaks to Blazers fans who are always kind of hoping and wishing and praying that we're going to get to that point at some point in time. So, I think that's part of it as well. But, the energy in the building when Hansen was really going there in the third quarter versus the Kings, I mean, that's a real thing. And, in the post game as well, like cracking some jokes, as I posted on Twitter, like really kind of my favorite Hansen joke right now is when Chris starts asking him a question or translating a question. He's like, no, you gotta say it into the microphone. And I think part of it too was, after the game versus the Kings, Chris was like, I know that Hansen understood the question that you just asked, but he still wants me to translate it in Chinese, which makes a lot of sense too, because obviously we have a lot of fans who are in China who are watching these post games and who are watching our games as well. Shout out to all my folks in China. Shout out to all my followers on Red Note. I appreciate it. And so, Hansen's also doing it for the fans back home, and that, we're asking questions in English. And even though Hansen, I think, understands some of those questions, he's still like, no, Chris, you should translate this into Mandarin so that way people back home can understand what we're talking about, which is pretty funny. Just gives a little taste of his personality as well. The friendship between him and Chris is really great. And I think Chris is doing obviously a great job. But I think, having a friendly nature about you with both Hansen and Chris I think has really helped that relationship as well. So that's been fun. The other thing I would say too is that, when you watched Hansen in that game versus the Kings, he's got the three, he's got that drive where, it's pretty slow and methodical, but, he understands kind of how to move his body. He understands it's kind of drawing contact and then using it with those kind of like looping layups that he does to kind of get around his defender, with the way that like he complains to referees. You kind of see you understand the Nikola Jokic comparisons. Like there's definitely times in that third quarter where I was watching and I was like, I get what people are saying. He's not Nikola Jokic. Jokic, one of the best to ever do it. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's Nikola Jokic. I'm just saying I can understand where people would watch those guys play and say like, yeah, there's some similarities there, even outside of kind of the style of play. I think some of their mannerisms, I think, again, kind of some of the ways they use their body types. Neither one of those guys at this point, especially like trim, muscular dudes, they're guys who more understand how to use their bodies to, create an advantage, even if from a physical perspective, it's not an imposing thing. They're not like freak athletes or anything like that. So again, I just, kind of, again, with the long looping layups, the spin move that's kind of like, it's pretty methodical. It's coming, but it's creating space nonetheless. The way he like does the come on referees, can you explain this to me kind of thing? All that pretty Jokic like. So one game, one preseason game versus Sacramento Kings, one quarter of one preseason game versus Sacramento Kings, but it looked pretty good. I understand why people are excited about it. You should be. Keep your expectations in order, I would say, but also it's fun to think about what could be and what Hansen does for this team going forward, both in this season and in seasons in the future. So a really good game versus the Kings, and now they're at 1-1, a chance to get back to it this week. 2 preseason games before starting the regular season at not the end of the month, but close to the end of the month. But a very nice performance to build on as the Trailblazers go into the second half of the preseason schedule. Tuesday versus the Warriors at Moda Center, and Thursday versus the Jazz in Salt Lake City. And finally, as I mentioned, Chauncey Billups continues to tinker with lineups as he said he was going to do before the first preseason game. So curious to see if what he decides to do in the game versus the Warriors and the game versus the Utah Jazz. As I mentioned, kind of threw people for a loop when he brought Deni Avdija off the bench and started Shaedon Sharpe and Jerami Grant in the game versus the Warriors. Then he went back to the more traditional line. Well, I guess not the traditional lineup, but a lineup we saw a lot last year with Shaedon Sharpe, Toumani Camara, and Deni Avdija in the starting lineup with Jerami Grant coming off the bench. Jerami didn't come off the bench last year, but he didn't play a lot of the games in the second half of the season last year, which is why you saw that lineup a lot. And so then going into the game on Tuesday versus the Warriors, a little curious what Chauncey might decide to do in that one. I think, as I mentioned, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they sat Drew, though they're probably not going to sit Drew because, again, like they just don't have a whole lot of depth at the point guard position. So then you kind of wonder, are they going to bring Shaedon off the bench? Because that's something that Chauncey obviously did last year at points in time too, was that they would start Toumani, Jerami, and Deni and bring Shaedon off the bench with that second unit. So curious to see if they decide to do that versus the Warriors. Shaedon did have a very good game versus the Warriors in that first preseason game. But really, it's not about like having a good game necessarily in preseason. It's about playing consistently and seeing consistent lineups or seeing what you want to see out of lineups on a regular basis in preseason. So I'd be curious to see if they decide to go that direction. I think it's possible. I'm trying to think of other ways that Chauncey could tinker with the lineup that would make sense. Donovan's going to start. They're not going to start Hansen. So like, I don't really see that being an option unless they decide that they just want to rest Donovan. So that's kind of out. Don't really have, as I mentioned, a whole lot of depth at point guard. It's possible they start Blake Wesley, but Blake is really more of a defensive minded guard and less of kind of a playmaking creating guard, at least from what I've seen in his time with the team. So maybe they go with Caleb Love in that situation, but also you kind of figure Caleb will be the third or fourth point guard. He's on a 2-way contract, so I don't know necessarily that you go from him being the third point guard in preseason to starting in preseason. So maybe they go with Blake. Maybe they go with Caleb. Chris Murray has had a few nice little runs playing kind of towards the end of games, so maybe they decide to throw Chris out there in place of Deni or Toumani, and if Toumani's knee soreness is something that's lingering, maybe they do go that direction. I would imagine if they were going to do that, then maybe that's what they'll do. Maybe they'll sit Toumani in the game versus the Warriors and start Shaedon and Deni and Jerami together. That's a possibility as well. Actually, that if I'm going to guess, actually, and this is just pure spitballing, maybe that's what I'll guess they do. I'll guess that they won't play Toumani in that game versus the Warriors, and instead they will start Shaedon and Deni and Jerami together. That's a complete speculation on my part, but the fact that Chauncey has wanted to try different lineups and do different things, and if Toumani is suffering any kind of soreness whatsoever at this point, they're not going to chance losing guys in preseason play. So maybe they go that direction. Again, though, I think you really got to hand it to Chauncey. I feel like he and his staff have done a really good job of getting this team prepared in training camp. As I mentioned in the last show, this training camp to me seems like it's running better than any other training camp. It seems to me like they're more prepared for the start of the regular season in this training camp after 2 preseason games than I would have said they were last year or the year before that after their entire preseason. I think part of that obviously is Chauncey has grown as a coach. I think, having a bunch of new staffers as well. I think it is helping. I think Nate Bjorkgren's doing a great job as well. So, I think that things are kind of coming together a little bit. And so the way that they decide to kind of tinker with those lineups and then deal with whatever kind of fallout's not the right word, but like dealing with any of the issues that comes up because guys are coming off the bench when they'd rather be starting, I think is something that Chauncey and his staff are very well equipped for. I think that Chauncey's probably been very clear with all the guys kind of in that wing rotation that like, hey, I'm going to try some things. I'm guessing he probably gave them a similar speech to the speech he gave the media, which was, hey guys, I want to try some things out. I'd rather you not read too much into it. We're experimenting. We're trying some new things. We're trying to play a different way this year. We're going to have deeper rotations this year because we're going to play faster. So I'm going to play 10 or 11 guys, whereas before I would have played 9 guys. So I'm guessing he's probably kind of verbalized that to the team as well. And I feel like, again, he's just done a really good job of keeping guys engaged and satisfied with their roles as he maybe kind of changes what some of those roles and expectations are going into this season. So, curious to see what he does in the game versus the Warriors, if anything. Curious to see if a lot of times coaches will use the last preseason game as kind of a dress rehearsal for the start of the regular season. The only thing I'd say about that, though, is that the Blazers play the Jazz on the 16th, and then their regular season starts on the 22nd. So that's 6 days. So that's kind of a long time to have a dress rehearsal before the start of your regular season. Because I think with that much time in between, I don't know that you're really getting a whole lot from being like, okay, we're going to play this game versus the Jazz close to the way that we would play a game versus the Timberwolves, who we're going to face on Wednesday, October 22nd at Moda Center in our season opener. So I'm kind of not expecting that to be the case. I think what I'm guessing is probably more likely in that last game versus the Jazz in Utah is that they probably give more minutes to the bench guys, if I was going to guess, rather than playing that one straight up like a close to regular season game. Again, this is just me I wouldn't even say reading the tea leaves, because reading tea leaves would indicate that I actually have something that I'm looking at and expounding upon. I'm really more just kind of thinking about what's the way that Chauncey would be able to find out more about this team and what are maybe some of the moves that they could do throughout preseason in order to do that. So curious to see how those last 2 preseason games shake out. The game versus the Warriors Tuesday at Moda Center will be on KUNP, Blazer Vision, and 6:20 a.m. 7 o'clock start time for that one. The game versus the Jazz in Utah, however, not being run on KUNP. In the game versus the Kings, which was at Moda Center, they overlaid the arena feed with the radio call in order to provide at least something for fans on Blazer Vision. We won't have control, obviously, of the arena feed in Utah. So I'm guessing that maybe there will be no Blazer TV either on KUNP, KATU, or Blazer Vision, but I'm not entirely sure about that. But I do know that the Warriors game will be on KUNP, Blazer Vision, and 6:20 a.m., 7 o'clock start time, so check that one out. I think the Jazz have been broadcasting their preseason games, particularly maybe their home games. So, maybe it'll be out there somewhere. I actually don't know. But I'm guessing if you look hard enough, you'll probably be able to find it, but it will not be a Trailblazer broadcast as far as I know at this point. Maybe a little update on that for you later on in the week. But as far as I know, the game versus the Jazz, not on TV. The game versus the Warriors on Tuesday will be on TV. Also, too, quick, before we go, just quick injury non-updates. Neither Rob Williams or Matisse Thybulle have played yet in preseason. Rob Williams with his return to competition reconditioning. Matisse Thybulle's had a little bit of right knee soreness. both those guys, as I have been told and as I hear, are improving. Team feels very good about where they're at in their rehabilitation. Sounds like they're hoping both guys will be available for the start of the regular season, and if not for the start of the regular season, very close to the start of the regular season. But I'm not especially expecting either one of those guys to play in preseason. Again, that's just me guessing and kind of knowing the way that they deal with injuries. I think that, they don't want to necessarily chance anything. They want to make sure that both guys are really squared away with their injuries. Rob, for obvious reasons, and Matisse, kind of the same idea too. Last year Matisse, I think the way that things played out, like the expectation was that he was going to be healthier and able to play more. Had some setbacks at various times throughout the season. Only really got to play the last couple weeks of the season. Looked fantastic in those last couple weeks of the seasons, by the way. So much so that I think I saw the other day that Matisse, I think, is maybe has the second best odds for leading the NBA in steals this season behind Dyson Daniels. So, they're a very good player when he's able to get out there. And I know Matisse is champing at the bit to be able to play. If I had to guess, I would say that would probably not be in preseason, but who's to say? Could happen. I'm just not really necessarily expecting it to happen, particularly because if they don't play those guys in preseason, another 2.5, nearly 3 weeks in order to rest and recover before the regular season starts. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Briefcase. Thanks so much for joining me. As always, new editions, both of The Briefcase and The Blazers Balcony this week, final week of preseason, as we then lead into the final days of training camp and then the start of the regular season, as I mentioned, October 22nd versus the Timberwolves at Moda Center. But before then, Tuesday versus the Warriors, Thursday versus the Utah Jazz. Plenty of coverage from those games and from practice. Obviously, I'll be at the game versus the Warriors, and I will also be in Utah with the team for the preseason finale versus the Jazz. So check me out there, wherever you get your NBA Trailblazer news, Twitter, Instagram, Red Note. Trying to post some TikToks every now and then, but I'm not really successful at it. Follow me wherever you are. Follow the Trailblazer accounts. That's actually more important. Better information on the Trailblazer social accounts than on my account. And that way you also don't have to hear my lunatic ramblings as well. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, thank you to Spirit Mountain. As always, we will be back soon. I'm Casey Holdahl. Go Blazers.